Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to the Friday night program here with the Islamic Center of South Bay. Inshallah, tonight we'll be having a program that is titled Islamic Estate Planning with our dear brother Ahmed Shaikh. He is an attorney by profession. He's a specialist in estate planning, trust, and probate law by the State Bar of California. Brother Ahmed is also the co-author of an American Bar Association publication titled Estate Planning for the Muslim Client. Without further ado, I'd like to have Brother Ahmed go ahead. He has a short presentation for us. Following the presentation, we will have questions and answers, as there may be quite a few. For the question and answers, you could either type them in the chat box, or when that portion of the program comes, just go ahead and unmute yourselves and ask. So inshallah, Brother Ahmed, your floor.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure speaking with all of you. I know that we're not in the masjid, but I'm so grateful, alhamdulillah, that the masjid program can continue. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, so this is really a program about your responsibilities. And so the way I describe this to a lot of people is that we come to a realization at some point in our lives that we understand, or we come to an understanding that we're not going to be in this world forever. We are going to leave this world, and we are going to have some stuff, and we're not going to be able to take that stuff with us. And we're going to leave behind some people that we love and that we care about. And we need to be able to do things in the most excellent way possible. And we need to do right. We need to do right by the people that we love and that people that we care about, the people that are in our family, and most importantly, for people who are Muslims, we need to make sure that it is done in a way that is pleasing to Allah, that is based on the command of Allah, and that we are not robbing anybody of their rights in Islam. When we go, we don't want to make sure that we're not doing where our parting shot in this world is not an injustice to other people. And so, Jazakallah khair for that kind introduction. Let's see if I can, oh, there we go. So yeah, I am, just as Brother Saad had mentioned, I am a board certified specialist in estate planning, trust, and probate law, and I did write a book on estate planning. I'm also the chair of the Orange County Bar Association Trust and Estate section. And I've been doing this since about 2006. I've been a lawyer since about 2000, or since 2000, I should say. And then I started my practice in 2006, focusing primarily on the Islamic rules of inheritance, Islamic estate planning. I've handled hundreds of matters in that time, mostly within the Muslim community, though certainly I've helped people who are Muslims as well, and dealt with a lot of different types of conflicts relating to inheritance issues. So one of the things that we're going to be doing with this presentation that's going to be somewhat different from presentations I've done at Lamida and elsewhere, and I've had the special privilege of speaking at Lamida multiple times over the past, I guess, 15 years or so. And so I'm grateful for that opportunity. What we're going to be doing is not necessarily just talking about or speaking to people who want a lawyer, but also to make sure that people who don't necessarily want a lawyer or feel as though they need a lawyer, or they're not ready to take that step, to provide the option of just doing a last will and testament. And we're going to go over the process of doing a last will and testament if you want to do that. As luck would happen, most of you are at your computers right now. You have the ability to get a template, and you can fill out a template right now, today, if you want, and complete will and testament. Now, there are reasons why you might want to not want to do that, and you want to go to an attorney. Now, doing this just because I'm an attorney doesn't mean I'm actually your attorney, right? And I'm not necessarily giving you legal advice here, but I think the process of doing a last will and testament is also very instructional as well, in the sense that you'll be able to learn a lot more about what it is that you're doing with the various responsibilities that you have. One thing I should say is that anything that we do, or anything that I do for people, I want to make sure people have peace of mind in doing it, which is to say that whatever it is that you're doing, when you do this type of work, primarily you're dealing with a world that you're not a part of anymore. And the circumstances of the people that you leave behind, that is your wife, your husband, your children, your parents, whoever it is, whatever their circumstances are, and even if they are here, you're not part of that. You're not part of that conversation, but you're still accountable to it, because if you do things wrong, then injustices occur and it's too late for you to do anything about it. And so one of the things you need to do is make sure that you're getting some peace of mind. So one of the things I want you to do in order to get this will template is you can text the number 44222 and text the word Islamic will. Just text the word Islamic will 44222. Now that might be a misnomer, Islamic will, and we might discuss why that is. But for some people it will be. It will be Islamic, and some people it might not be, and I'll describe why that is. And then the other thing you can do is you can go to the website bit.ly/will template. So bit.ly/will template. If you can just open a window and go to that website and just download, it'll go to your, it'll go to your email, and then you can just download it from your email. You can get your, we'll just email it over to you, and you can just you can just follow along with that template, and there'll be particular points in this presentation where you'll have an opportunity to fill out that template. It's a form fill PDF, so it should be pretty easy to fill out. And we'll go over some of the blank spaces. Now, I've actually talked about this before with respect to how we are concerned with what happens with inheritance, or why we are concerned about what it is that happens with inheritance. And this is a story that involves a man and a woman who get married, and the man and woman, they're happily married, and they have a daughter together. And their daughter they have a daughter, the husband and wife, they're all a great, wonderful, happy family, and then something tragic happens, and that is the mother passes away, or the wife passes away. And this man who is now a single father with a young daughter, he does what you might actually expect that what he's going to do is he's going to get remarried. And typically what happens with men in particular is men will frequently get remarried very, very quickly if their wife passes away. It might not be the same for women. Women sometimes do, but most of the time you will see men get married very, very rapidly. In this particular instance, what happens is that, or in this story, this man marries a woman who has two daughters that are about the same age as his daughter. And then, unfortunately, the man passes away, leaving the daughter in the care of this woman, this stepmother, and with his stepsisters. And what happens to this woman is that she ends up becoming a servant in her own home, right? She, of course, is forced to sleep downstairs in the basement, the cinder blocks, and of course, her name is Cinderella. And what we found with Cinderella is that the story is not unique to Disney or Europe. It actually exists in virtually every single culture, in every single tradition, every single language, all over the world. Somebody keeps on asking to annotate the shared content, but I wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't be able to use it. I mean, I won't be able to move along if I do annotate. So I'll have to decline these requests unless somebody explains what that's about. Anyway, so anyway, as far as the story goes, this story is actually quite universal. And the idea that inheritance is often weaponized against the orphan, and that orphans often lose out on their inheritance, is a really common experience, and it's something that is very formative in Islam, in the Islamic seerah, in a lot of ways, in the experience of the orphan. And inheritance is actually, or doing inheritance correctly, is a remedy for that. Right, there we go. And so the Quran actually tells us, إن الذين يأكلون أموال اليتامى ظلما إنما يأكلون في بطونهم نارا وسيصلون سعيرا, that those who devour the property of orphans unjustly are only consuming into their bellies fire. And so the immediate ayah after that is the ayah of the Mawarith, which is, it starts with Yusikumullah fi awladikum, which is that concerning the inheritance of your children. And so what we're going to be doing today is talking about Islamic inheritance. We're going to be talking about property ownership and Islamic living trust, which is the largest subject we're going to be talking about, as well as a wasiyah. And we're going to be doing a guardian. We're going to talk about guardianship, and we're going to have a section where we're going to be doing some will planning as well. Now this is a freezer. This is for people who believe that they can be brought back or reanimated. This is an actual business people have, and they decide that they are the person who's going to be their heir. Typically, when they do this, it's something called a personal revival trust. When they find a cure for death, somebody's going to come and give them an injection of whatever it is that is the cure for death, and they'll just sort of walk out of this freezer, and everything will be okay, and they'll get their money. You know, that's just something that is a thing here. That's not something that's a thing for us. Of course, we all know that we are going to pass away. Let's talk a little bit about property and how property is owned. So in order to make sure that we're vindicating the rights of the heirs, you want to make sure you know how it is that you own your property. In California, we have a system of community property, but that is deceptive. That is a system that in large part exists upon divorce, but it does not necessarily exist in that same way upon death. And the reason for that is most people own their property joint tenancy with right of survivorship. And that means the surviving spouse gets everything. 100% goes to the surviving spouse. And one of the things that you should understand about 100% going to the surviving spouse is that is haram, because the Quran ordains specifically what share the surviving spouse is supposed to get. And it is not everything, right? So there are other people, and we're going to describe this when I talk about Islamic inheritance. There are other people who are entitled to inheritance in Islam, and that is the children, that is the parents, that is the spouse. And so there are other people who are entitled to inheritance. And so what are we doing when we create community property? Now, this is not a system that exists in Islam, right? It is a system that is not necessarily an Islamic system, but it's also not one that is against Islam, because Islam does not actually regulate how a husband and wife own their property. So if you want to give a Ferrari to your wife for her birthday, there's nothing in Islam that prohibits you from doing that. Similarly, if you and your wife agree that everything is split between you 50-50, that is fine. That's a cultural thing that exists in the United States, or specifically in California and the 9 community property states that exist in California. We tend to think that everything is 50-50. Now, not everybody thinks that. You don't have to think that. I'm not here to tell you, I am not here to tell you how your marriage should be run. I am not here to tell you that your marriage should be one thing versus another. So anyway, that is community property. Community property, you can decide that everything is split 50-50, and then your 50% will constitute all of your property, and that's going to be distributed based on the shares of Islamic inheritance. Next up is separate property. You can of course decide that everything is whatever is yours, and whatever is your wife's is your wife's, or husband's is your husband's. You can decide as between the two of you that certain things are separate. Now, you can have certain things as community and certain things as separate. One very common thing is jewelry. For example, husbands typically have no interest in claiming 50% ownership in their wife's jewelry. That is their wife's, right? Same thing with inheritance. Inheritance in California as well is typically separate property anyway. But sometimes people commingle and share things together. And so inheritance is a thing that exists after you pass away. Whatever it is left with you that you can't take with you is inheritance. And so our system in the United States is that is free alienation of property. It's my money, my money, my money. I can do with it as I please. That's the system, right? So if you want to do a will, you want to do a living trust, and we'll talk about those different terms, but the basic idea is after I die, if I want to give everything to my children equally, I can do that. If I want to give more to one child versus another, or if I want to cut out a child completely because they weren't nice to me or they're not calling me on my birthday or whatever, you can do that. If you want to take all of your money and give it away to charity or put it in a big pile and burn it in front of a group of orphans, you can do that, right? That's America. It's your money. You can do with it as you please. Now, in Islam, we have a completely different system, right? The Islamic system is that everything in the heavens and the earth and all that it contains belongs to Allah, right? We read that when we read Ayatul Kursi, and it comes up many times in the Quran that everything in the heavens and the earth and all that it contains belongs to Allah. So it's important to understand the shares of inheritance in Islam. The shares of inheritance in Islam are going to be most of the time for your spouse, for your children, and for your parents. So these are the main people who are entitled to inheritance in Islam. Now, this is going to be relevant for you, and this is meant to be, I mean, even though I'm kind of the one talking, I mean, for some reason, I'm not seeing the chat window. Let me see if I can find the chat window here. Okay, so I know that this is meant to be somewhat interactive and that I want you to actually have an understanding. All of you that are participating should know what the shares of inheritance are. And this is a software, this is islamicsoftware.org/IRTH. This is not my program. This is actually a brother who goes to the Garden Grove Masjid, who has been putting it up. Brother Ahmed, he's had this, I think, as long as the World Wide Web has been around. He's put this calculator up. And so islamicsoftware.org/IRTH, and it's a pretty good calculator for the vast majority of situations. Here, you simply name you simply put the number in, how many sons, daughters, grandchildren, that sort of thing. Now, what I can tell you safely is that if you have a son, you don't necessarily need to name your brothers or half brothers or anything like that. If you have a father, you don't have to do that either. So if you have children, if you have parents, you name all of your parents, or not name them, but actually number them. Mother, father, wife, husbands. You just put a number behind all of these people or these various relationships, and then you'll know to the very fraction what share of inheritance these individuals are going to be entitled to. Now, I want all of you to do this because it's going to be very useful later when we do the last will and testament. Now, even if you want to do a living trust and you're serious, you want to go to an attorney, you want to do the living trust, or you want to do a deed, and you want to avoid probate, and you want to do all these things that we're going to be talking about, it still might be useful for you to know who has the right on you after you pass away. Who has exactly what right on you? Because my son, my daughter, all of these people, did I just take myself off video? Sorry about that. My son, my daughter, they get inheritance from me. They get inheritance from me not because I like them or because I love them or because they were nice to me or because they returned my phone calls or they married somebody I approved of. All of that stuff is irrelevant. They get inheritance from me because Allah has ordained the specific share of inheritance that they are going to get from me, right? The exact share in many instances. Now, of course, there are certain areas where there's some disagreement about the shares of inheritance, right? So there might be some issues with madahib and stuff like that. However, most of the time, what is it at least that I deal with? I deal with people who have, they might have parents, they have children, they have a spouse, they have close family, they might have siblings, and so in a lot of these situations, there isn't a lot of disagreement. And at least the case when there's children and there's a parent, when there are parents and children, and a spouse, there usually won't be any disagreement among any of the schools of thought. It'll be the same across the board in the vast majority of situations, and especially the vast majority of situations that I will see. And I would suspect the situations with the vast majority of you. I think some of the more difficult situations are when there are converts, for example, where there aren't very many Muslim family members, and how do we deal with that? That's not something I'm planning on talking about today, unless there's a question about it. But it is something that I've had to deal with in the past. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, so parents get 1/6 each. So typically it's 1/6 for the father, 1/6 for the mother. Now I say typically because sometimes there are some rules in fiqh that have to do with increases or decreases of shares, or proportional increases or proportional decreases. So I'm actually speaking as to the in a general situation, but the Quran does say 1/6 for the father, 1/6 for the mother, and so they get exactly the same. Now, we also have we have 2 shares for the boy for every 1 share for the girl. Even if you knew very, very little about the Islamic rules of inheritance, this is probably one rule that you already knew about. It's probably something that you heard about. And in fact, it's one of those things that people who don't like Islam, or that are somewhat suspicious of Islam, or that think that Islam is kind of backwards, they might point to this particular rule, that daughters get less inheritance than sons. And so one of the things that we need to look at when it comes to the Islamic rules of inheritance, and I should say that the vast majority of the time with Muslims or my Muslim clients, this is a non-issue. This is something that's been ordained by Allah, and people understand this. They also understand that in Islam, the rights and responsibilities with respect to property, with respect to ownership of assets, is fundamentally different with men versus women. So men, of course, well, I should start with women. Women have the ability to spend money on themselves, and they have the responsibility to use their money for nobody except themselves. They do not have a responsibility. They might feel a responsibility, but they do not have necessarily an Islamic responsibility to support other people in the family, whereas men do have that responsibility. And think of it this way, and this is something that this is an example that I've given to many people before, and so you might have heard this before if some of you have been on my presentation previously. But say, for example, you have a 40-year-old man who is successful, and you have a 50-year-old woman, his sister, that is not doing so well, that is having trouble supporting herself, that is going through some really tough times. And this brother is not supporting his sister. Imagine the sister goes to a court. This is a grown woman, 50-year-old woman. She goes to a court and she tells the judge, look, I am going through these difficult financial situation, and my brother who's 10 years younger than me is not supporting me. Make him support me. And a judge would say, you know what? He should do that. Now, for any of you that have lived in the United States for virtually any length of time, you would identify that as being completely ridiculous. There just doesn't appear to be any legal right or obligation for anybody to do something like that, to support a 40-year-old man supporting his 50-year-old sister. There's no responsibility that he has under our system of laws here in the United States, and yet in Islam, it's actually different. They continue to have that responsibility. Now, remember, we're not talking about inheritance here. We are talking about just the responsibility that an individual has. And so one concern that many people might have about this is that, well, yeah, of course, that sounds good and well, that that men have this responsibility to women in Islam and in an Islamic society, but we're not in an Islamic society, and that legal obligation doesn't really exist, and so maybe we should do everything equally. Well, here's the thing, though. You have the ability to create your own Islamic system, and you have your own ability to create your own your own system of rewards and making sure that to a great degree, the obligation of support is in your plan. So when you create a system of Islamic inheritance, you're not merely creating a system. Well, sometimes you are, but you could, if you want to, not merely create a system of shares being divided up, but you're actually creating a system where the responsibilities that people have towards each other is also being vindicated. Now, sometimes we have situations where, well, I don't know, maybe many of you probably know some family where, or some parents who have older children where the parents are kind of disappointed with their children, right? Many of you have maybe seen that before. Sometimes it's a big thing, like they're not Muslim anymore. Sometimes it's a really small thing, like, you know, daughter-in-law issues or son-in-law issues or things like that. And they could, of course, all be very serious in their own way. What we want to do is make sure and manage this in the best way possible. And one of the enemies that we always have when we do our own planning, and this happens probably more frequently as we get older, and as our children get older and have their own lives and have their own drama in their lives, is that we let our own vanity, our own sense of vanity, our own sense of, well, we think we know what's right because it's our money and we can do whatever we want with our money. We let that get in the way of our decision-making process. We need to understand that there are rules in Islam, and we need to make sure that inheritance goes to the right people. And sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense to give money to people in inheritance outright. And we recognize that. I mean, this isn't a completely blind and completely unfeeling and a completely mechanical system. And so, say for example, there's a child who has a substance abuse problem or a gambling addiction problem, or has a creditor issue, or things like that. And we want to be able to address those problems as well when we address the Islamic rules of inheritance. Sometimes, of course, people leave Islam. And if they leave Islam, they no longer have the right to inheritance in Islam. And so, you know, there's a lot of different ways that we deal with that specific issue. Let's talk a little bit about trust. Now, I brought out a lot of issues, and a lot of those issues are resolved through a process of trust. Now, what is a trust? By the way, how's this going, everyone? If there's any feedback, am I talking too fast, too slow? Is I being clear? Everything's good? Everything's good? Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. Well, I got Saad's thumbs up. I can't see anybody else, but that's fine. The process of creating a trust is a contract. And when you create a contract, and you don't necessarily think of it in this way, but when you create a contract, you are creating law. And we often refer to it as the law of a contract, right? So say, for example, Saad and I got into an agreement, right? And we're getting, I'm getting some snow globes from Saad. Saad is getting me some snow globes of the city of Lamida. So tourists come to Lamida and they get snow globes of the city of Lamida, and he's going to ship them to me, and it's going to be at the San Pedro Harbor at a particular date at a particular time, and the snow globes are going to be a specific quality, and we sign it, we have it witnessed, all that. We have a contract, right? Now we can put other terms in the contract as well. Well, what if the snow globes are, they're supposed to be blue, but what if they're purple? Or what if they're just the wrong quality? Or what if they leak? Right? What happens under those circumstances? Well, he and I can agree in advance as to, well, we're not going to go to court, we're going to go to arbitration. We're not going to do this, we're going to do that. We're going to make our own agreement, and we're going to essentially make our own law. And no matter what the California Code says under those circumstances, it is not that law that applies. It's the law that Saad and I agreed to in a contract. And so when you create a trust, you're creating a contract essentially with yourself. Now, this violates some of the rules of contract, but that's okay because the trust law addresses that. And so we can create this type of a trust where we're creating an agreement between three different types of people. Is the grantor, and the grantor is the person that creates this agreement in the first place. And so I have a house, I have a business, I have a bank account, I have all of these things, and I'm putting them in a trust, right? So I created this trust, and I'm giving them to the second person in this arrangement, and that is the trustee. And the trustee is the person who's managing all of this property for me. Who am I going to hire as a trustee? That's me. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'm going to be the trustee. I'm the grantor. I'm the trustee. I'm making an agreement with myself. And I'm doing this for the third person in this arrangement, which is the whole reason that this arrangement exists in the first place. And that is the beneficiary. Who's the beneficiary? Well, it's not this little girl, I'll tell you that. It's not her. It's me. Again, it's me that is the beneficiary. I am the grantor. I am the trustee. I am the beneficiary. Now, why am I doing this? Well, because I'm not always going to be the trustee. And I'm always not going to be the beneficiary. There will be other people that will replace me as the beneficiary, and there will be other people that will replace me as the trustee if certain things happen. And one of those things is death. The other is incapacity, which I'm going to address a little bit. One of the other things that I should mention here as well about an inheritance is that, remember, I said that the shares of inheritance are what? Well, the wife, if you have 50%, the wife will get maybe 50% because not because she inherited 50%, but because that's hers, whether she's dead or alive, right? And then for a wife, she gets 1/8 if there are children, 1/4 if there are no children. A husband gets 1/4 or a half, depending on whether or not there are children. And if you live in Southern California and you live in a house that's maybe bigger than this house anywhere in Southern California, especially near the coast, or in any of the nicer areas, definitely, many people will have most of their assets in their house. Most of their wealth is tucked in their house. And so what are they going to do under those circumstances? If one of the spouses dies, where is that spouse supposed to live? And so one of the things that we also do is address how inheritance works. Inheritance is not necessarily just giving people cash. It might be arrangements that we make within the family. And so say, for example, you have a business. That business might be divvied up in particular ways among the family without actually breaking up the business. And so you can get inheritance, and an inheritance can be a right to something. It's not necessarily cash. Just the same way as if you were to own shares in a company, you don't have the ability to tell the CEO what to do. And so the trust has arrangements to address that. Actually going on a relatively, I'm speaking relatively quickly about all of these issues because I know that there's going to be some questions, and I want to put in some time so that we can actually do our last will and testament. Another thing to also consider is many families, even if you don't have one right now, if you were to pass away, life goes on, and people do have blended families quite frequently. And you need to actually make sure that justice is done under those circumstances. And maybe community property isn't the right way to do things in blended families because that could be an injustice to certain family members under certain circumstances. So you do want to look out for that type of thing. I would say that in California, or at least here in Orange County, where I am, in the local probate courts, probably most of the disputes about inheritance happen because there are blended families where there's where somebody had multiple marriages before he passed away or she passed away. And there are lots of different family members, and there are different sort of factions within the family. And so that's I already addressed this, the remarriage. Remarriage is probably one of the biggest fitnas that we have in our society in general. It causes a lot of pain and anguish within families. Oftentimes, if a man loses his wife and has adult children and then gets remarried to a woman, one of the truisms that exists in our world a lot of the times is that woman is not going to be looked upon very kindly much of the time in many family dynamics. Usually I think the term for somebody like that is that woman. And sometimes, I mean, because people think that there's a hostility because of a fear that this person might be a gold digger. And sometimes it's well-founded, oftentimes it's not. I once had a case where there was a very, very successful person, and he had He had a great business. He had private planes. He had a lot going on for him. And he had a wife. He had a bunch of kids. They were adults by then. And then his wife passed away. And he was, of course, sad, very sad that his wife passed away, as anybody would be. And then he got a phone call. And that phone call was a wrong number. It was just a wrong number phone call. But he kept talking to this person. And then he eventually married this person. He married her. He stayed married for about 20 years. And then he passed away. And one of the things that he didn't know at that time, and none of the kids knew, nobody knew this, but at the time she actually called that wrong number phone call, she was a convicted felon. And she had spent the next 20 years systematically stealing millions of dollars from this guy, and everybody in her family was a convicted felon. Nobody had any idea about this. Okay, so talk about protecting children. This is another one of the goals that we have, and this could mean all sorts of things, whether it's lawsuits, whether it's divorce, whether somebody just asked, what is a blended family? Sorry about that. I just saw that question. So a blended family is a situation where you have a man and a woman who are, say, married, and the man has children from a prior marriage and from the marriage that they're in, right? So a man is married and he has children from multiple prior marriages. Sometimes, I mean, we're talking about Muslims, it might be multiple marriages that are happening at the same time, right? Or women that had multiple marriages, because they were, like they married somebody, got divorced, or they were a widow, and then they got married again. And so there are children from these different marriages, and that could be incredibly problematic. It could be rewarding, it could be wonderful, it could be a lot of good things, but it often becomes a really big mess when it comes to inheritance. And just because you're not in that situation right now doesn't necessarily mean that your children won't be in that situation at some point in the future. Think about the story of Cinderella that I was telling you about. Cinderella is a blended family. The idea of Cinderella, her inheritance was essentially robbed from her, and her inheritance was weaponized against her. And so Cinderella is a victim of a blended family where that is how oppression of orphans often takes place, is within blended families. And so one way of looking at the story of Cinderella is, who is the villain? Is the villain the wicked stepmother? Is the villain the wicked stepdaughters? Who is the villain? Well, the villain might not be any of those people. The real villain might be the birth mother and the birth father of Cinderella, the ones who didn't care enough to do an appropriate plan for the daughter, for looking into what situation might be like in the event that they were to pass away. They didn't do things properly, and instead, they basically let their daughter to the wolves, right? And that's frequently what happens. People exploit orphans. People have exploited orphans for all of human history. People are not going to stop exploiting orphans, right? And when you are planning based on the Islamic rules of inheritance, one of the things that you are doing is protecting your children who are not currently orphans because you are alive, right? And so you need to make sure that you are taking care of your children. You don't anticipate dying anytime soon. You probably won't, but you might. Special needs. This is a situation where okay, got it. So special needs trust. This is I'm going to skip over this. This is for people who have disability. If there are any questions about that, I'll address them. And I'll skip over this as well because I want to spend more time. Incapacity. I'll talk a little bit about this. So incapacity planning is there's a lot of people out there that are walking, talking, telling jokes. Everything seems completely normal with them, but if they got an email from Nigeria asking for the bank account, they might just give it to them, right? There are a lot of people who you might consider them wise. You might actually go to them for advice. But family members, close family members know that they're not very good with money anymore. What do you do under these circumstances? Well, there's a process in probate court called a conservatorship. And that is a humiliating process for a lot of people. It is a lengthy, expensive process, and it's a public process. What we want to do when we do our estate planning is protect people's dignity and privacy. And so we create a shura that addresses that particular issue. Wasiya is another really important concept in Islam. Wasiya is, you can, and I'll go over this a little bit when we go over the last will and testament, but wasiya, you can give up to 1/3 of your estate to a beneficial cause, somebody who is not otherwise entitled to inheritance in Islam. And then so you can give this to non-Muslim relatives or other beneficial purposes like charity. You cannot give it to heirs. And then I'll skip over this. Guardianship we'll talk a little bit about when we get to the last will and testament, but it is one of those really important issues that's often, it's often just overlooked completely. If you have minor children, at the very least, if there's one thing that you learn from this, and when you get your will, you should, there's a space there for guardianship. Name people who can take care of your children in the event that you cannot take care of them yourself. Just name them. Sometimes this is actually one of the most difficult things, because I know in the Muslim community, especially people who go to masajid, a lot of us are immigrants. A lot of us are people who came from other countries and have family members in other countries. And some of my clients, they don't trust people, locally. They trust people that in their own family. And so you could do that. You could name people overseas. It's harder to do, as you can tell. There's a bunch of risks in doing that. And one of those issues, I mean, historically, I would talk about how it is that America usually doesn't, a lot of times they're in conflict with one country or another, and they might not admit people for a while from one Muslim country or another Muslim country. Of course, things have turned around completely since then. Now, nobody wants Americans anymore. Nobody wants Americans to go to their country because Americans are all disease-ridden or something. So we don't, we have a lot of trouble with guardianship overseas, but it is possible to do it. And of course, this pandemic situation isn't going to last forever. So now let's do our last will and testament. And remember, this is really for people who don't want to go to a lawyer. I, of course, always, and this is maybe completely self-interested, you can decide that, but I do recommend that you go to a lawyer but if you want to do it yourself, if that gives you peace of mind, then do it, right? That's the, if whatever it is that you do, whatever track it is that you go on, as long as you feel that you are doing right by the people that you love and care about, do that. Be it online, do it yourself, do a will. I want you to make sure, and I want you to do something, and make sure you're keeping this on your mind. That you should, if you don't have a will, and there's a hadith that it's unbecoming of a Muslim to go 2 nights without having a will written about it. Okay, for anybody who has anything worth passing on. You want to make sure that you have a will. Even if you don't have anything worth passing on and you have children, you do need to have a will to address the children. And so you need to also consider, well, how Islamic is this going to be? Well, maybe not that Islamic. If you have a house, for example, and you own a house joint tenancy with right of survivorship and you're doing a last will and testament, that will means absolutely nothing because everything is just going to pass on to your surviving spouse. By operation of the deed or by the bank account or the beneficiary designation, there's a whole bunch of ways that the system is rigged to give everything to the surviving spouse, no matter what you have written down. And so this is primarily going to be for people who have individual assets, probably not for people who are married, who have assets together. It's not going to do much in and of itself. But if you do have property on your own, it'll at least address that property. And if you're single and with a bank account or a few assets here or there, something like that, it'll probably be fine. If you have assets in excess this year of $166,000 in total, then you have something called a probate. A probate is when you need a dead person's signature to transfer property from one person to another. And because dead people can't sign things, you need to go through a court process to get those assets released, and that takes a year and a half. Sometimes it takes a while to get things done. So so you want to be able to avoid a probate. If you're not in the zone of doing a probate and you don't have property together, There are a number of situations where a last will and testament might be fine. Okay, so does everybody hopefully have the last will and testament template that was I mentioned in the very beginning? And if you don't have it, go to that website. It's bit.ly / will template. So bit.ly / will template, and then 44222. You text the number 44222, and it's I think it was Islamic will. So you just insert the word Islamic will to 44222. You can text there, and you'll get this document. Just so you can follow along. That last will and testament is a form fillable document. So you just fill out the form, print it out, sign it, get it witnessed, and it's executed. In Islam and in the state of California, a will requires 2 witnesses. I'll get into that a little bit as I get to the end. So you would, of course, name yourself here, whether you're married or unmarried. If you have children, if you have no children, you mark it there. You know what? I should have actually put the. I'll probably, if you sign up for this and if you ask me for this, I'll update this, because I think I needed to put the radio buttons there as well. But if you have children, you name the children. And then there are other people that you might want to name. If you have parents, now your parents, not your spouse's parents, your parents inherit from you. So typically they get 1/6 each. Under certain circumstances, they may get less or more. The calculator I sent you, that's islamicsoftware.org/IRTH. That will actually tell you who is entitled to inheritance. So here you name you name them. You don't name the share. I'll get to that. Remember, this is that website I told you about. You go here, you get the calculation done. This is going to be your next page, and then here you're going to provide. This is a wasiyah. So if you want to give a part of your estate in a wasiyah, you would just enter the fraction here. It cannot be, and this actually will helpfully tell you that, it cannot be more than 1/3. So it cannot be more than 1/3 of your overall estate. There's actually a hadith on that, and that's all of the schools of thought agree that it cannot be more than 1/3. Of that, divide everything up. If you don't have to give a wasiyah, you can just put 0 here. If you want to give everything to your family, then just to put 0 here and then skip over this section. If you do want to give things to charity, this is the place to put it in. And then the remainder share, you're going to put the relationship, the name, like this is my father, this is my brother, mom or sister or daughter, whatever it is, and then the specific fraction that they're supposed to receive. You get that from islamicsoftware.org/IRTH, and then you can just insert that there. The next thing is going to be a personal representative. You're going to have to name people that after you pass away, this person is going to gather your estate, pay off your debts, and then distribute everything based on the instructions that you have provided. They would represent you in court. They wouldn't be a lawyer. They'd have a lawyer for them, but they would stand in for your interests and make sure that everything is done based on your wishes. And so that's who the personal representative is. It might be your spouse first, it might be a brother, it might be somebody else that you trust that will take on this role. And this is one of the most important things, and probably the only thing that matters for many of you, why we always do wills, even in my own practice. I don't do this type of will necessarily, it's different, but we always do a will, and we always include, when it's appropriate to do so, a guardian for minor children. So this is where you put the information for guardian of minor children, and then you just name them one after the other. And then this is another thing, is burial instructions. Now, if you've been Muslim for any length of time, you know that we all like to complain about our own community, and things are, this is bad or that's bad, or this is happening or that's happening here or there, what have you. But one thing I should say about the Muslim community is nobody is better than the Muslim community when it comes to burying people. Nobody is faster, more efficient, and does a better job than Muslim communities. And this is actually true pretty much everywhere. You know, it's a rare situations where people get this wrong. And so with Muslims in particular, I mean, non-Muslims, everything's so complicated, but with Muslims, I often tell people just don't worry about it. If you have a plot, you might want to include that information. But you know, the people who are doing the janaza, they don't need your help in understanding how to do a janaza. They don't need your help, and they don't need to be explained what a ghusl is or janaza. They don't need that. They don't need you to help them with that. So don't. Just don't worry about it. If you have a Muslim family, that's fine. Some people don't have Muslim families, and some people don't have close Muslim friends. I mean, in those situations, you'll probably need to be very specific about these things. But most of the time, you don't need to be. Okay, and so you will then, of course, have a place for your signature. You're going to write down how many pages there are, and then you're going to have witnesses. The two witnesses that you're going to use are not going to be your family members. They're not going to be people who are already entitled to inheritance. They're not going to be people who are named as personal representatives. They're going to be completely different people. And so these are going to be the people who are going to witness your last will and testament. And you know, this is something that I often remind myself and others about. That this ayah of the Quran, that that your wealth and your children are but a trial, right? Anyway, this is a good movie, and it's about it's really about the types of fitna that happens. I'm just going to skip over it. That's not even worth it. Anyway, we need to make sure and follow what Allah has ordained when it comes to the Islamic rules of inheritance. And unlike what happens in those movies, or what happens in all of these other scenarios that exist in American culture, that are primarily based on the idea that this is my stuff, right? And we have a whole bunch of things in American culture about if you know, you need to get married by 35 or you're cut out, or you need to do this, or you need to do that, or this needs to happen, or I'm disappointed with you, or what have you. None of that matters. You need to do justice with people, and especially people that you love and that you care about. This is, of course, the guide, and that's it. I think for my presentation, that's all I've got. Let me unshare. Hold on just a moment. And am I still here?
Yes, you are.
Okay, good, alhamdulillah. Now, are there any questions or anything?
There really quickly, there was one question that was in the chat. I'll just go ahead and read the question from the chat first, and then the guest that's listed as HP. Actually, go ahead and state the question, inshallah. We'll go with that first one.
Can I ask the question?
Of
Yes,
course, go ahead.
Thank you, brother, for this lecture. My question is, can you have more than one personal representative in case something happened to one of them, the other will be there to take care of things?
Yes. And in fact, if you noticed in the template that we provided, there's space for multiple personal representatives. If one fails, and the other is there. And keep in mind that when you name somebody as a personal representative, you're not obligating them to do anything. Because that person may or may not be around when you're there. I mean, when you leave, they might not be there, or they might not be in the headspace to do this job, right? They might be going through a divorce or some sort of sickness or something like that, or they may be out of the country, and you can't just obligate one person to do it. So even if you ask them, oh, you know, if I die, can you take care of my kids, or can you take care of my will, or whatever, and they say, oh yeah, of course, no problem. But that was 5 years ago, and that was a different world. So yeah, you can. The answer to your question is yes, and you should.
Okay. Jazakallah khair, brother.
Ayakum. Any other questions?
Yes, there is one question that was listed in the chat. If your father and mother passed away, No sons or daughters. What's wrong if one passes away with the other getting everything that they have?
What's wrong with one passing away, the other getting, because in the Sharia, there are, if you have other family members, then they would be entitled to inheritance as well. So if you have siblings, for example, the siblings may be entitled to inheritance as well. The wife doesn't necessarily get everything, or the husband doesn't get everything. Now, there are certain circumstances where there are no other family members, and this happens very commonly with, say, converts, where all they really have is their spouse. And so that makes it a little bit more complex, but that given that that's their only Muslim relative, and there's no such thing as Baitul Mal anymore, or anything like that. So the surviving spouse can get everything under those circumstances. But we have in the Sharia, what we do is we go through the family tree, and whatever branches there are in the family tree, and as close, the closer they are to you, they have more rights to you, based on the criteria set forth in the Sharia, right? So so your siblings are typically going to be the closest under those circumstances. If you don't have siblings, then there might be uncles and aunts and therefore and so forth. So there's going to be a hierarchy of family members that are going to be entitled to inheritance.
Okay. Next question. How do we avoid probate court when parents die and the son needs to receive property without capital gains tax?
Right. So two different questions. How do we avoid probate? If you do things through a living trust, you typically don't have probate. Not typically. You usually don't have probate if the property is in the living trust. And so that avoids probate. There are other ways, of course, of avoiding probate as well. But usually it involves some sort of a contractual arrangement that avoids probate. And now the other thing is capital gains tax. What typically happens with capital gains is that there is a step up in basis. And so you get date of death step up in basis, meaning that, so say for example, you have property that's, you buy it at $1, right? And a few years later, it grows to $10. And the difference between that $1 and that $10 is $9, of course. And that's what's referred to as the capital gain. And the capital gains is subject to a capital gains tax. That's a federal tax, and it's subject to ordinary income tax in the state of California. So you're looking at something around 25% as far as your taxes. Now, what happens with respect to the capital gains is that the government is going to say, if you were to die, the government is going to tell your heirs, look, we know that your father bought this property for $1 and now it's worth $10, but we're going to pretend that you bought it for $10. And if you sell it now for $10, there won't be any capital gains. If you wait a few years and now it's worth $15, well, there's going to be some capital gains, but not from the $1, but rather from the $10. So there's something referred to as a step up in basis. Now in California, there's something called community property. Of course, we talked about community property a little bit. One of the benefits of community property as well is that step up in basis goes to both the decedent spouse's half and the surviving spouse's half, even though the surviving spouse is alive. And so there's this incredible benefit that if they just sell the property after the first spouse dies, they get the capital gains forgiven, essentially. And so that's a really amazing way of doing it. And then I think I see some other questions here. Brother Assad, you want me to read them? Or
Just go ahead and go through those questions, Fella.
Okay, that's fine. Let's see. Yeah, is there any way of reversing joint ownership with the right of survivorship? Yeah, I do that like all the time. That's what we do. We just you just do a deed and you put it into a trust. When you put it into the trust, you're breaking the joint tenancy with right of survivorship, and then you have a property agreement. One of the things that we always do between a husband and a wife is we have a property agreement. So the husband and wife have to decide how property is owned as between the two of them. Typically, they're like, oh yeah, it's all 50-50, or sometimes people don't feel that way. They think that they have some other arrangement or some other understanding with respect to property. So, but you can get out of joint ownership with right of survivorship. One of the things that I mentioned before about about the step up in capital gains. You don't get that with joint tenancy with right of survivorship. You lose out on that step up in basis, and so it's a really horrible way of owning property. Leaving aside the whole Islamic thing, the Islamic thing, of course, makes it it's just prohibited in Islam to own property joint tenancy with right of survivorship. You shouldn't be doing that, and most people do that, and so you should just avoid that entirely. Next question: how do we avoid probate court when parents die? Okay, I think I already asked that one. Answer that one. When putting percentage shares in the will, do you have to adjust the percentage based on funds allocated through other means such as 401k beneficiary form? For example, wife entitled to 1/8, but is getting much more from 401k. Yeah, so if there's a 401k, that obviously adds to the complexity of this. One of the things that you're going to need to do with the 401k is change the beneficiary, so it's based on the Islamic rules of inheritance. One of the things that I do is I make it so that it's in trust. So the beneficiary designation is to the trust. All of the ownership of everything is into the trust, and the trust decides how the distribution is going to be done. And then we can also allow for the surviving spouse to get the 401k if she wants the 401k, and there's something called the spousal rollover that you can potentially do, but if you structure it correctly. But the surviving spouse is not entitled to the entire 401k. If it's your property, or if it's your 401k, that, like every other asset that you have, is subject to the Islamic rules of inheritance. The wife isn't actually that special. The husband isn't really that special when it comes to just the share of inheritance. They get what they get. Now, you can give them stuff during their lifetime. You can give them 50%, for example, community property. You can do stuff like that. But the 401k needs to be distributed based on the Islamic rules of inheritance. And if it's going to the surviving spouse needs to compensate the other family members with other assets, because the surviving spouse sometimes wants the 401k, right? Because of the preferable tax treatment. And so if they're going to get that, they need to compensate the other beneficiaries with other assets. And there are a lot of ways to structure things like that to make it work. But yeah, that would take some analysis and review to get that right. But the share is what it is. Let's see. What happens if the heirs change after the will is signed due to the death of an heir? Well, that's a problem for you. In the last will and testament, you'll need to really be up on things because life changes. Life changes really, really fast sometimes, and sometimes we don't necessarily act before things might change again, right? And so this is just a personal thing for me. So I 7 years ago, I had this 2-week period where my mom had passed away and I had a son that was born, right? And that was obviously a really stressful time. And I'm an estate planning attorney. I was back then, I am now. And it took me like 10 years to update my own estate plan, right? And I know that it's very difficult for my clients to do the same thing. I don't expect that, okay, somebody's mom is going to die on Monday and they're going to call their lawyer on Tuesday. The world just doesn't work that way, right? And if that son died on Wednesday, then he has an estate plan that's just wrong. It's just wrong. Now, what's going to happen? It's going to go to a judge, right? Because a judge has to, this is all stuff that goes to probate, and a judge goes to it. And then a judge says, a judge is going to look at it. What is a judge going to do? A judge is going to be like, well, a judge doesn't have the ability to interpret Sharia. It's like, what's Islamic inheritance? What's Sharia? I don't want to have anything to do with this. It's intestate. What's intestacy? It means basically you die without a will, or at least for that particular portion, we're just going to make the distribution done based on the default in California, meaning that if you died without a will, what happens if you don't have a will? You're intestate. That's not really a problem. The government gives you a will, and that will doesn't have anything to do with Islam. So the short answer, I should say, is that if somebody were to pass away, you're not going to, or somebody new were born and then you passed away, then your Islamic will is not going to be that Islamic necessarily. Now, one of the reasons why I like doing things in a living trust is something called a trust protector. Now, this is a thing that I had not discussed already, but one of the things that we do is we create a regime of a trust protector. A trust protector has the ability to make modifications even after death. So like in that situation, like I was talking about, where my mom passed away and then my son was born, and then say a month later I passed away, and I had a living trust and I had this provision with a trust protector. What would happen is a trust protector would get appointed and then calculate the shares of inheritance, recalculate it, and make an amendment after death, because after my death, my living trust becomes irrevocable. A trustee or somebody, a successor, can't say, well, I know that's what he wrote, but I'm going to change it to do whatever I want. No, you're going to have specific parameters of what is allowable in the Sharia. You're going to have a document, and you're going to have it very well documented as to what the obligations of the trust protector are. They can't do anything they want, but they can recalculate the shares of inheritance and make sure that the proper allotment of shares is given to the right people, right? Now, that's not ideal necessarily. The ideal situation is that, you call your lawyer and just do an amendment, get that thing fixed. It's not a big deal to change shares of inheritance. But it's the fact of the matter is it takes a while for sometimes for people to get to that. So in a living trust, you're way better protected than you are in a last will and testament. You're just doing a better job. So when the last will and testament is, it's probably a little bit stopgap, maybe, but it's not. I don't think it's that great of a plan overall, just because it's judicially supervised. Anytime you're dealing with something that's judicially supervised, unless you live in an Islamic society, which is with Islamic courts, you're probably not doing it right. Okay. Let's see. 401k. I think we already answered the thing about right of survivorship. Yes, we can do that. What about tax liability on the inheritors, whether from property or in retirement funds distribution? Okay, so there is typically no income tax on inheritance. So you receive inheritance, there's no income tax on that, with one exception, and that is what's referred to as income in respect of decedent. So 401ks, IRAs, last paycheck, stuff like that, stuff that has never been subject to the income tax before is subject to the income tax. So those assets are subject to the income tax. That's why, that's why it makes sense sometimes to give it to the surviving spouse. If the surviving spouse is under the age where there's mandatory distributions, and they can just roll it into their own 401k and pay taxes on it over the course of many decades. It's not necessarily less tax, but it's tax that's spread out while the asset is growing. There's that type of tax. There's another thing called the federal estate tax. The federal estate tax really just applies to probably less than 0.1% of the entire U.S. population. It's a very, very small percentage. The taxes are it's about 40% over, I think, 11.56 million or something like that. Excuse me. So yeah, so that's the situation with the estate tax. Now, there are, of course, if there's a tax issue, either income in respect of decedent or the federal estate tax, there are ways to mitigate taxes through tax planning, and that's available for people who have that need. The need for tax planning is a lot less these days than it used to be, but it still comes up quite frequently. Charitable planning is a really big area where tax planning is works out very, very well. Can retirement funds or investments be put into a trust similarly to property? You can beneficiary designate retirement funds, certain types of investments. Yes, of course, you can put them in a trust. A trust is typically the vessel through which everything flows. So the trust is kind of the master document that deals with everything in some way or another. When you do your estate planning, you're dealing with all of your assets, and most of the major rules are going to be in the trust. Now, there's going to be a lot of other documents, of course. There's going to be a property agreement. There's going to be a certificate of trust. There's going to be wills. There's going to be a power of attorney. There's going to be a bunch of stuff that people are going to be doing, deeds to the house, home, or other property. So there's going to be a lot of different things in any comprehensive estate plan, but the trust is the core. And so anyway, those are the written questions. Are there any other questions that I need to address, or did I miss any?
There was one, there's a couple more written questions that just came in. Before that, there was a separate question that I got. In California, what constitutes a legally binding will? Does it need to be notarized?
In California, a last will and testament does not need to be notarized. So the will form that I provided goes through all of the various formalities. You do need to date it, you need to sign it, you need to have it witnessed by 2 witnesses. So there's some requirements. So there's some just basic requirements that we have for last wills and testaments that are not that great. And of course, there's also a state of mind requirement that's actually less than the it's less than your capacity to contract. So it's as long as you know who it is what it is that you own and who your family members are, then that's usually good enough as far as the last will and testament goes. The trust is based on your capacity for a contract, which is a higher state of, it's basically a higher mental state. But no, we typically don't need to witness or notarize trusts, but we typically notarize them because they deal with real property. Real property is the issue that needs to be real property, or documents that concern real property tend to be notarized, and so we typically do notarize them. A trust, of course, be oral, technically. I mean, but there are certain things. A trust is a relationship more than it is a document. Of course, oral, it's not a practical way of doing it. We get it, we have it written. They tend to be fairly complex documents and they tend to be notarized. Let's see, we have, if you don't go to the trust route, our POD is a good idea. That's PODs, for those who don't know, is a payment on death. No, they're not. There's just no way of making sure that things are being done consistent with the Islamic rules of inheritance through a POD. You could be doing an injustice to one or more people very, very easily. I mean, a lot of the times when we're planning based on, we kind of assume, we often bias towards assuming that the future looks kind of like the world as it looks now. But we know that the world isn't always going to look the way it's looking now. And no, PODs are just planning through PODs is just a horrible, horrible idea. Let's see. Does one have to file trust returns on an annual basis with the IRS and FTV? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it depends. So if you get a living trust, your own revocable living trust, it's a grantor trust, and it's considered an ignored entity by the IRS. That's the terminology that they use. You do your regular income taxes just like anybody else. Now, though, there are certain types of trusts, like an irrevocable, once it becomes irrevocable, or certain types of trusts that we do for asset protection planning or, tax planning, things like that. Sometimes there is a possibility of doing taxation for trusts and doing a tax return for a trust. There relatively few people do it that way. If you're just doing it for death and incapacity, you're just doing essentially a will equivalent for your living trust, you're not going to do taxes for the trust and then also for yourself. It's just going to be the same thing you've been doing before. It's not going to, when you do a living trust, typically it doesn't materially change your life. It doesn't add to tax bills or anything like that, or including tax preparation bills. It doesn't make your life dramatically more complex because you have a living trust. Let's see, who would be the best person to draw up a trust? A lawyer, accountants don't provide legal advice. That's not their thing. And I've never heard of one doing trusts. I mean, I see sometimes them doing LLCs. That's kind of iffy, but they do it. But I've never heard of them doing living trusts. That would be unauthorized practice of law. It would be a felony, actually. Let's see, how much does it cost to set up a revocable trust? It depends. It just varies widely. So we're just talking about specifically with me. The minimum cost for me is $500, but it varies widely. For married couples, it's a little bit more. It's like $500 more, and that includes all of the various documents that most people will need. But then people have lots of different requirements, and sometimes with clients, I might suggest one or more. I might suggest 3 designs. I might suggest just one and just say it's going to be this much and that's it. Or there might be significantly more complex with tax planning or special needs planning or charitable planning, those types of things. So it varies widely. Let's see. Do we register the trust with the county registrar? So it actually gets recorded. The trust, if you have a house, the deed gets recorded with the county recorder's office. And so like the LA County Recorder, Orange County Recorder, they are the ones that that record the deed. The trust itself is a private document. It usually doesn't come public, and usually people do it for their privacy. It usually doesn't come out into the open unless there's some sort of litigation. And that's when you're doing it based on the Islamic rules of inheritance, litigation is going to be extremely rare. It's one of the blessings of doing things Islamically is that your personal vanity, things like manipulation of the elderly or all sorts of things that cause conflicts in families, all of that is absent. People understand, even people that aren't very religious, even Muslims that aren't very religious. Okay, this person who died, I mean, my father, mother, whatever, was a believing Muslim. They did things the way that was in the Quran. There's literally nobody to be angry with. And it's just an incredibly beautiful way of maintaining family unity, harmony, and dignity for the families, for the person who passed away, for the children, for everyone else. You're doing it. I mean, I think I really think that it's just an incredible amount. I mean, an unbelievably amazing amount of wisdom to not trust human beings with deciding how inheritance is distributed. That is something that Allah has ordained, Allah has decided, and that is a mercy on humanity. That is unless you're actually doing this every day like I am, you won't understand how much of an incredible blessing that is. So anyway, let's see. Any other questions or?
That seems to be it for the questions.
Okay, wonderful.
I did want to say,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. If you have any concluding remarks.
Oh no, I just it's a wonderful honor and privilege to be asked to speak to this beautiful community again, and inshallah I hope to see everyone in person in the future when the masjid reopens.
Inshallah, we would like to convey our thanks and gratitude for you for sharing your time, for sharing your expertise. This is a very important subject that we had. As you can see, there's a lot of input, feedback, questions. It is a duty and responsibility upon us to, be prepared with things that we don't really like to think about. And if we have guests that can share their expertise, it's just an amazing thing. We're very thankful for you to share your time with us, and Jazakallah khair for all of this. Brother Anwar, was there something you'd wanted to add?
I'd like to say Assalamu alaikum. Sheikh Ahmed, thank you for joining us, giving beautiful information, a lot of information. Looks like the one family night is not enough. We have opening on October. Maybe I'll contact you. Maybe you can join again.
Maybe.
Continue your So like I start saying, this is very big matter, and a lot of people need to learn. They're confused about the laws and everything, wills, so we can get more familiar with them, so they may make it easy for their families to make a decision. Yeah, inshallah.
I'm always thrilled to come.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Again, thank you. Again, thank you very much, Brother Anwar. Thank you, Brother Ahmed, for your time. Thank you for all the guests that participated. Inshallah, we hope that you have a wonderful weekend. Remember your masjid and your contributions and your du'as, as well as, the ummah in general. There's a lot of trials, tribulations going on all around the world. Remember the Muslims in your du'as. Jazakallah khair for joining us, and we will see you next time, inshallah. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.